Why do I shoot Sony? What made me switch from Canon to believing in this new cinema line? Why is Sony everywhere? Why is Sony absolutely crushing it when it comes to cinema cameras designed for video? I'm gonna do my best to do this quickly because there's so much to talk about here. Number one, low light. Sony has been the king of low light for a while. I think a lot of the other camera brands have caught up somewhat to them, but Sony has just always led the charge. The idea that they were making sensors that were low megapixel but had larger photo sites, were able to give you crazy low light results. It just was a huge draw, and especially for people who were doing events and weddings and documentary style shooting, which Sony was really favored for. Just having that low light technology was like absolutely a game changer for so many people, especially coming from the DSLR era, where if you went over like 2000 ISO, you basically had a horrible image. The fact that Sony really became known for their low light technology, I think, was a huge reason that so many people began to become invested into that ecosystem. And this didn't even matter if you went for the A7S, which was obviously the king, but the A6500, the A6300, the FS7, all of their cameras essentially were incredibly good at shooting in low light situations. Whereas if you look at the competition at the time, the offerings from Canon, Red, etc., Blackmagic, they just couldn't cut it. Like, I used to shoot a lot on Blackmagic cameras as well, and they were gorgeous, they looked amazing, but the moment you weren't giving that sensor enough light, if you were starting to crank, 1600 and above, the image really fell apart. So I think that low light is a huge reason why me and so many other filmmakers became invested and interested in Sony. One thing that's the elephant in the room that we gotta talk about is the rise of the Sony Venice. The Sony Venice has taken over Hollywood. So many projects are being shot on this camera. The fact that Sony has a body that is at the highest end and leading the industry, that feature films, television shows, the highest end commercials are being shot on, that success and that popularity is just trickling down into the rest of their line. I've been on so many shoots where the A cam was a Sony Venice, and then they had an FX3 and FX6 as the B or C cams. I think that the fact that a $4,000 FX3 is good enough to shoot a feature film on, I'm talking about the Creator, and not only that, but that it's good enough and has the quality to be able to match and cut in with a camera as high-end as the Venice. I think that the fact that Sony's built an ecosystem that a filmmaker can start out with an affordable camera and work all the way up to something like the Venice, it just makes getting into the Sony ecosystem so appealing. I think it was genius that they built out a cinema line that starts with a $2,000 camera in the FX30 and progresses all the way up to a camera like the Venice that could shoot the next Hollywood blockbuster. There's just so much there in terms of branding and promise that I think isn't being done by any other camera company. Red and Arri don't have that entry point camera, and Canon, unfortunately, doesn't have that high-end Canon. In my opinion, if Canon wants to compete with Sony, they need the C700 or whatever their highest end camera to be actually getting used by actual filmmakers in Hollywood. The fact that they don't have a progression that could take you all the way up to the highest end, I think is a problem for Canon, because right now Canon is just kind of stuck in that middle tier of filmmaking that unfortunately is somewhat dying. They just don't have that high-end, industry leading cinema camera that's being chosen for the most prestigious projects. So when you are a filmmaker, and let's be honest, a lot of people do aspire to try to ascend their career to the highest points, and you're getting invested in putting a ton of money into an ecosystem, to invest in a brand that has a lower ceiling, I think makes people a little bit more hesitant, whereas Sony has you covered basically at every price point you can imagine, all the way up to the high end. When the FX3 came out, I remember people hating it. At the time, people hadn't really embraced this mirrorless style body being sold as a cinema camera. People were also annoyed because they were saying that the FX3 was essentially an A7S III being sold to us with a different coat of paint. But as time went on, somehow, and I don't know how Sony did it, I think it's because the camera itself is just so awesome, but Somehow Sony has convinced the world that yes, this is a cinema camera. Yes, this is awesome. It's become such a popular camera because I think that Sony understood the progression of the modern filmmaker. I'm gonna say that again. Sony's cinema line is so popular because they understood the progression of the modern filmmaker. They know that someone's first camera is not gonna be an FX6. It's not gonna be an FS7. It's not gonna be a RED camera. They knew that a lot of people's first cameras were photo cameras that they were utilizing the video features for. And so putting a lot of video-centric features into a photo body, into a form factor that was super familiar for everybody was a genius move. I'm in that category. I came up in the DSLR era with Canon DSLRs, and I really learned filmmaking with this style of body. So to me, having all of those pro features in a form factor that I was familiar with was absolutely a game changer. They understood that this was gonna be a winning formula. They put it out even though there was a lot of backlash, and it's absolutely paid off for them. I think a huge component as well is just the price. Bang for my buck, an FX30 with this 18-105 power zoom lens is the best beginning filmmaker package, hands down. I can't think of a better body and lens combo for the price, for the range, for what it does than this. The fact that you can get so much bang for your buck by going with Sony, that you get so much performance, so many features, the entire ecosystem as a whole, the range of lenses, the way that the media works, the way that the batteries and accessories and everything is interchangeable when you have multiple bodies. Like, the entire ecosystem is very fleshed out. And I think for that reason, it's also something, again, when we're spending thousands, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars into a brand's ecosystem, and we're gonna be married to that ecosystem for a very long time, you wanna make sure that the company you're investing in has a track record of delivering. By and large, Sony's track record for so many years is another reason why people are willing to invest in the system, is because they've earned the trust of the consumer over time. Another huge factor, in my opinion, to why the current cinema line is so popular is the success of all of Sony's previous cameras up until this point. Let's not forget about the FS7, an absolutely legendary camera that still holds up to this day. For a long time, like, that was my dream camera. I shot with it so much. I still think it's an amazing camera. If you can find one used, I think that it's just an amazing value. I think it holds up to this day. And I think the track record that Sony built in its cinema line, that it built in its more broadcast and, you know, documentary style bodies, as well as their mirrorless bodies, they just kind of built up favor and took so much market share from Canon over time that it's really, at the end of the day, that Sony was able to make the right moves to get people to switch from Canon to Sony, to switch from Panasonic to Sony. I have had these cameras for a long time, so I'm currently shooting on an FX6. I have an FX3 here, which is probably my most used camera. I have an FX30, which is just the most killer B cam of all time. And then I have an A7 IV, which I mainly use for photos, but I also, again, can be sent off to do amazing video in its own right. I've had all these cameras for like 4 or 5 years now, and they have not aged at all. I think they still are crushing it. It's kind of like the first set of cameras I've had that I didn't really feel held back by. Investing into something that you know you're gonna be able to use for years, know that it's gonna pay back for itself. The other thing that I'm sure is annoying to a lot of filmmakers is like that it's a snowball effect. I see so many Sony cameras when I'm hitting people up for jobs, or I'm working with these agencies or production companies, or I'm, you know, other shooters are coming on board with me and they say, hey, what are you shooting on? And I tell them, oh yeah, I've got an FX3, I'm sending out my other guy with an FX6, and you know, my third shooter has got an FX30. It's like there's a sigh of relief on the phone. They're like, okay, cool. He's got the best gear. We know how this system functions. We know that all of these cameras are going to be able to match each other, and everyone else who's shooting this event or a part of this project or is gonna be on the campaign is also shooting Sony. Having gear that is well known and is an industry standard is really... Here's the good part. is that we are in the greatest era of filmmaking gear of all time, for sure. The fact that every camera is good now is incredible. Like when I was coming up, there was definitely a difference. Like if you had a camera that was 8-bit versus 10-bit, or different camera manufacturers had better or worse skin tones and all that. The fact that everything from every manufacturer, like including Nikon, including Blackmagic, like everything is good now. If you just get the latest camera from any camera manufacturer, it's pretty much gonna be a good enough tool to get the job done. And that's an amazing thing. So I think that no matter what brand you shoot on, no matter what equipment you have, you're not really held back by the gear anymore. It's all about the story you're able to tell, how you utilize it, and what you're able to do with the gear. I think that that is pretty sweet. I don't think that you have to have a Sony. I just want to make a video kind of explaining why I decided to invest in this ecosystem and why it's been working so great for me so far. So anyways, look at this guy. Are we gonna leave this part in? All of that's aside from the fact that I just think that these are all really great cameras. The fact that you can shoot in the same codec and the same quality, whether you're in 24 or 30 frames, all the way up to the 120 frames per second, having that really high quality slow motion for me in these cameras is amazing. The fact that between the FX30, the FX3, and the FX6, you can shoot in all of the same modes and frame rates, and they all have a cine tone and the same profiles. They all match. I mean, that's just a huge benefit. And this is Finn. He was feeling really lonely, making a bunch of noise while I'm trying to film. So I decided I'd let him get a little bit of the spotlight and put him up here. He's my favorite Sony camera. They only made one. He's the last of his kind. So you guys can't go on B&H and buy him. I think it's even funnier if I don't even mention that there's a dog there. That's pretty much it. Time will tell if Sony can continue the run that they're on, but let me know what camera company you guys are invested in. Do you agree that Sony is dominating? Do you disagree? Let me know. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.